Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the spring portal cycle and how there were some really good signs from it in terms of roster retention and kids just figuring out what the portal is and maybe it's not the right fit for them. But let's jump into the second segment here and talk about the coaching carousel that happened this offseason. It feels like everyone bounced around all over the place, and it started with two big dominoes with Nick Saban retiring, obviously, and then Jim Harbaugh moving on to the NFL. That opened a lot of doors, and especially Nick Saban retiring, which we'll get to the dominoes that fell after that. But there's been a ton of movement, both in the head coaching circle, especially in the head coaching, and then you add offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators, you add position coaches. There's a ton to get through. So I wanted to give you guys an idea of just where the big names are. I did not get to everyone because, man, there were a lot of movements this offseason, but let's just give you an idea of where we're at overall. So let's start with the head coaches, and let's start up in Michigan with Sharon Moore. This is obviously one of the biggest moves of the offseason. Taking over for the guy that just brought you a championship is never necessarily shoes that people are too eager to step into, but this guy is fully ready to go. I talked about it yesterday on my spring overreactions, and I just said this guy is as ready as anyone could be for this position. He was 4-0 as an interim in 2023, has Joe Moore Award winners in back-to-back years in 21 and 22. The dude has been a head coach, or at least been ready to be a head coach for quite some time now. And now he's fully ready to go, and it's his program, and we'll see how he handles it. But I have full confidence in Sharon Moore to handle what is going to be a very, very tough job in the future. But let's keep in the Big Ten here for a minute and talk about David Braun, who did just an incredible job at Northwestern a year ago. Just did remarkable things when taking over for a really, really tough situation with their coach being fired really shortly before the season started, brought that team to a bowl game. So just remarkable stuff from David Braun. Very excited that he gets that full-time opportunity and ready to step into those big-time shoes. But then let's move to Jedd Fisch over at Washington. Leaving Arizona the way he did is never going to sit right with Arizona fans. There's just no way. He was in there for about a couple of minutes talking to the players and then found his way up to Seattle. And, it's the way of the coaching world, so can't necessarily blame him too much. But at the end of the day, fantastic hire for Washington. You're going to get great offenses. Now, I think 2024 is going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, which we'll get to here in the next segment. But I do think that Washington is going to be a force to be reckoned with Jedd Fisch at the helm for quite some time, to be totally honest with you. But let's move on to Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. This one is huge. This is obviously, striking while the iron's hot type of thing. Jonathan Smith has done an incredible job at Oregon State the last couple of years, and he is now, obviously with Oregon State standing right now, was looking for another job, and Michigan State jumped right in and picked him up and was an absolutely huge pickup for them. I think this is one of the better coaches in the entire country. I think his capability is, his best coaching years are well ahead of him, if I'm being totally honest. So very, very interested to see what happened. Trent Bray took over for him at Oregon State, who was the defensive coordinator there. So just to give you an idea of what Oregon State's working with this year. But let's move on to Kirk Cignetti, stay in the Big Ten here for a second. And this is a guy obviously coming over from JMU, was one of the best stories in 2023, now takes a huge step up into one of the toughest conferences in the entire country at a school that football is not necessarily the biggest priority. Let's just be honest with each other. So it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle. I think he brought in a lot of guys from JMU that are going to play big-time roles for them. Now it's going to be a bumpy landing. I think we all understand that going into the Big Ten. When you are, going into Indiana as a first-time head coach at this level, it's going to be tough. That's just kind of the reality of things, but this is a very capable coach that could turn around what Indiana football has been for quite some time. So very excited for his tenure at Indiana. I think this year might be a bumpy start, but I think it could be smooth sailing going forward after that. But let's move on over to Houston and talk about Willie Fritz, because this is one of the most interesting hires, in my opinion. This is the guy that led Tulane to that remarkable win over that USC team when Caleb Williams won the Heisman. So obviously a very, very talented coach, a guy that's done incredible things at Tulane, had John Sumrall take over for him at Tulane, and Now he's at a big-time job. He's at a Big 12 job where he can, really sink his teeth in, get to work. And Houston's a very, very rich recruiting place. So at the end of the day, if he can put his foot down and recruit Houston really well, he's going to be successful for quite some time there. Now, I think it's going to be a little bit tough this year with some of the people that left the program and some of the things that he's dealing with. But overall, this is going to be a really good hire. And I think in the long run, whether he's there for 5 years or a decade or two, I think he's going to be he's going to have very, very good years at Houston, I guess is the best way to put this. But then let's move on to the SEC and let's talk about Mike Elko. He is obviously taking over for what was a bumpy last little bit for Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher. I think this is obviously a big-time job. This is one that a lot of people would love to have, and Mike Elko has had it fall into his lap, but there's not going to be a big leash. I think we've understood that with the buyout that they just paid to Jimbo Fisher. They want to win, and they want to win now. So I think Mike Elko, brings an identity that is absolutely crucial to Texas A&M and to their success. But at the end of the day, it's going to be fascinating to watch if he's able to handle all the expectations that come with this, and if he's able to handle all the guys that have left that program, because it's been quite a few over the last little bit. But I think he's more than talented. I think he's more than capable, and we'll see plenty of Mike Elko going forward. But let's move on to Kalen DeBoer, and let's talk about this might have been the biggest hire of the entire cycle. When you talk about how much it was followed, it was pretty insane. I mean, whenever someone like Nick Saban walks out the door, there's going to be big eyes on you. And Kalen DeBoer has mostly answered the bell thus far, has done a really, really good job in terms of just roster construction, building out the staff that he has just been remarkable. I have a couple more guys that he brought in on this in this segment, actually. So very, very talented group. I think he's done incredible things with them, and I think he's in a position where he can succeed right away, and he can keep this train rolling, but it's not going to be an easy thing to do. And if it goes off the tracks, you're going to hear about it pretty quickly, so it'll be fascinating to watch what happens there. But I thought it was a great hire then. I still think it's a fantastic hire, so we'll figure out what happens there. But let's stick in the SEC for one more second here and talk about Jeff Lebby, an absolutely a very interesting hire for Mississippi State. Obviously, they had that sojourn with Will Arnett after they had to replace Mike Leach under the worst circumstances. So definitely was a very, very interesting year a year ago, but it feels like they've kind of found their footing again. And Jeff Lebby, I think, is going to be a really good head coach. I think he brings back that really fun offense that I'm sure Mississippi State fans kind of missed last year. So I think it's going to be a really, really good fit. I just think it's going to take a little bit of time. In fact, quite a bit of time, to be totally honest with you. It's going to be a bit, and part of that is because Ole Miss is finding their footing, and part of that is because guys are coming into the SEC and Texas and the OU. So it's going to be tough, but I think Jeff Lebby is up to the challenge. It's just it's an uphill battle, that's for sure. But then let's get on over to Brent Brennan, the guy that replaced Jed Fish at Arizona. A very interesting hire, one that I genuinely did not see coming. I thought they would go for somewhat of a bigger name, but he's coming over from San Jose State with Pac-12 experience, with experience recruiting in that area. I think he can do the job. I just think it's going to be a very, very interesting 2024. Obviously, keeping Noah Fafita and Tatori McMillan over there is just huge. It's something that I think a lot of us expected in that spring cycle that never really came to fruition. So huge for him, but it's going to be a really interesting 2024 for Arizona. I just think this was not the hire that I expected, I suppose, but definitely could be a very good one going forward. And then let's get to Del McGee, which is a fantastic hire in my opinion, one of the more underrated head coaching hires in this entire cycle. I think you add one of the best recruiters and developers in the entire country from UGA, and I think when he can sink his teeth into Atlanta recruiting, he's just going to be insane. So, and then finally, we have Manny Diaz over at Duke, who has done just incredible things as the defensive coordinator at Penn State over the last couple of years. The first head coaching stint did not go as planned at Miami, but he's ready to go. I think he's learned from that, and I think he will be successful at Duke with that hard-nosed defense that he is going to play. A couple others, you had Fran Brown hired at Syracuse. You had Bill O'Brien hired at Boston College after a little sojourn at Ohio State, which we'll get into actually right here as we talk about the coordinators, because there is a ton of big-time coordinator hires throughout the country, but I kind of zeroed in on the big boys, kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of who the big-time players are going to be in this upcoming season, and Blake Baker, I think, is the biggest hire of this entire cycle, if I'm being totally honest, whether that's head coaching, defensive coordinator, position coach, it does not matter. I think there is no one that will have a bigger effect on their team pretty much right away as Blake Baker, because we saw that LSU defense a year ago, and it was not good. So I think this might be the single best hire of the entire cycle. I think he's fully ready to unlock what LSU is capable of, but they have not necessarily had the personnel, at least don't currently, to do what he's going to want to do. So it might take a little bit of time, but I think it's going to be a fantastic hire if you look back on it in 2 or 3 years, to be totally honest with you. And then you had Wink Martindale take over at defensive coordinator for Michigan. We had Jesse Minter move on with Jim Harbaugh to the Chargers, so needed someone to step up. And this guy has connections to Harbaugh and the current staff. Definitely will run a defense relatively similar to what they were running previously. This will be a very interesting one to watch, though. This is a guy that obviously has spent a lot of time in the NFL. Coming down to the college level is always a little bit of an interesting adjustment. So it'll be fascinating to watch if this defense can just keep it rolling as they always do, or it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for this team. But then you have Charvarius Robinson over at Georgia, the co-defensive coordinator, that Georgia took full advantage of Bama being a little bit in a transition period, and adding him to a room that already had Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp and Glenn Schumann in it is just insane. So they're going to be as good as they've always been on defense, and the coaching is going to be maybe better than it's ever been on that defensive side of the ball. This guy can coach DBs like no one else in the entire country, so very, very interested to watch how he handles everything, and he's just going to be a rising star in this industry, I think. And then you go over to Alabama and talk about Kane Womack. He was the guy that took over for Charvarius Robinson, and I think anytime you can get a successful head coach to come and be your coordinator, it's a win. And I don't necessarily, I think it was a good move for Kane Womack, obviously, taking that step up into the Power 5. But at the end of the day, I think getting someone that has done the big thing and then taking back his responsibilities a little bit lets him kind of unleash that ability even more. And he has tons of talent, tons of knowledge on the defensive side of the ball. So very excited to hear what he can do in 2024. And then you have Tom Allen over at Penn State, a hugely important defensive coordinator for them. He is someone that absolutely needs to hit. In fact, I have the OC on here as well because they need these coordinators to hit. James Franklin needs them badly to hit. But then we have one more defensive coordinator here. DeAnton Lynn might be the most important defensive coordinator in the country, just because the flip that has to be made over there at USC is insane. And a lot of that is going to fall on his shoulders. So we'll see how he handles it all. A very talented, very energetic guy. So very excited to see what he can do. But it's a tall task. There's no two ways about that. And then Chip Kelly is one of the better hires of the cycle. I mean, you add someone that was a head coach that just didn't really want to deal with all of the outside stuff, just wanted to coach ball. You got him to coach ball, and it's going to be incredible. Having no Ryan Day calling plays, there were very few play callers that were better than Ryan Day over the last couple of years. Chip Kelly is one that can take it and run with it, so very excited to see what he can do. Colin Klein is another guy that is going to be very interesting over at A&M. Didn't necessarily have the most, explosive offense by any means at Kansas State, but absolutely got points on the board, absolutely was very, very consistent, and took care of the ball, which is a huge part of success for Texas A&M. So very, very interested to see how he lands there. And then Andy Kotelnick, we talked about, the OC at Penn State now. It just has to happen. These two have to hit. They have to come together, and this offense just has to be better than it has been in the past. I think he is able to unlock what Drew Aller has in him, what this offense has in it. But at the end of the day, it is going to be tough, and it's going to be interesting to see if these coordinator hires, nail for Penn State and James Franklin becomes a beloved figure, or we look at 10-2 again, and people start getting more and more frustrated, and some difficult conversations have to be had. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. But finally, let's get to some position coaches. And there have been a ton of big time pickups, but Bo Davis is probably the biggest pickup of the cycle when you talk about position coaches, because this is the best developer of D-line talent in the country. You saw what he did with Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy over the last couple of years. It's just been incredible to watch those two over the last couple of years, especially last year, do what they did, and he's not going to stop anytime soon. Now, the talent there is not near where it needs to be for him to really sink his teeth in and get the NFL talent players that you expect from him and from LSU, but at the end of the day, once you get that talent to start rolling in, it's going to be a mean defensive line for LSU, I can promise you that. And then Corey Raymond on the back end of that defense for LSU, hiring him at DB is huge, one of the best recruiters in the entire country, someone everyone in Louisiana absolutely loves, from fans to players to coaches. So he's someone that has tons of ties, has tons of energy on the recruiting trail, and absolutely will be one of their kind of Swiss Army knives when it comes to recruiting. You have a couple of guys on your staff that you'll just send out to essentially anyone because of how talented they are to sell your program, and this is one of those guys. So very, very excited to see what he can do. Johnny Nansen over at Texas as the linebacker coach is an absolute coup. When you can get a defensive coordinator that was as good as he was at Arizona and in his past stops, I think it's an absolute win. So obviously replacing Jeff Choate, who took over as the head coach of Nevada, is obviously going to be a tall order, but they did that and maybe more, to be totally honest with you. He already added Bill Norton from Arizona in the transfer portal, so is already helping them in that realm, but also is a fantastic developer of talent. So it'll be fascinating to watch this guy unfold. I think he might just be a rental for Texas, to be totally honest with you, because he's a defensive coordinator or a head coach, to be totally honest with you. So it'll be interesting to watch this guy. I think Texas linebackers are going to absolutely love the way that he approaches the game. But then we got a bunch of running back coaches, because there was a little bit of a cycle that went around in the last little bit of the spring, to be totally honest, when Tony Alford went to Michigan as the running back coach, and this is one of the best running back coaches in the country. I'd probably only put him behind Tashard Choice over at Texas if I was to rank them, but this is remarkable for Michigan. Pulling him from Ohio State it was not going to be an easy task, but being able to pull it off is crazy. And then you have Donovan Edwards, you have Khalil Mullings, you have plenty of talent in that room. This guy is going to do incredible things with that group. But then someone had to take over for him at Ohio State, and that was Carlos Lachlan, who came in from Oregon. This is about as good of a replacement as you could possibly ask for if you're Ohio State. This guy's had tons of success at Oregon, did great things with Bucky Irving a year ago. Jordan James has done awesome things while he's been at Oregon, and I think when you bring him into Ohio State, there's just more talent there, right? There's just a little bit more talent, that running back position, for him to sink his teeth into, and it's going to be something to watch, that's for sure. And then let's move on to the guy that took over for him in Oregon, which is Rashad Samples, who came over from Arizona State, a very, very talented recruiter, one of the fastest risers in this industry, and a guy that I would not be surprised if we saw him as an OC or saw him as a head coach in the next, 5 years, where this guy is just really remarkable to watch on the recruiting trail and also as a developer of talent. So, but then one of the more underrated hires of the entire cycle, in my opinion, was the guy that UGA got to replace Del McGee, which was Josh Crawford, who was the wide receiver coach at Georgia Tech last year. But this guy can do incredible things on the recruiting trail. He has so much ability, especially in the state of Georgia, to recruit kids. He was a huge part of the success that Tech has had over the last little bit with Brent Key as their head coach. So Josh Crawford is going to continue to rise in this industry. He's going to do incredible things at Georgia, I'm sure, and then move on and just do incredible things wherever he ends up next, because this kid is just remarkable to watch. So very, very excited to see what he can do with all of that talent they have in that room over there at Georgia. And then I have one wide receiver coach for you, and it's Jamarcus Shepard. I don't think there's any question here. One of the best wide receiver coaches in the entire country. Came over with Kalen DeBoer from Washington, and when you have the talent that he's going to have at his disposal, it's going to be insane. And I think he's going to get that wide receiver room back to what we, are used to it being. That iconic picture with Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, and oh, there's one more in there that I'm totally forgetting. I'm blanking on, and it will come to me at some point and I'll say it. But at the end of the day, Jamarcus Shepard can bring this back to where they're supposed to be, which is at the very top of wide receiver talent, and he definitely has the ability to not only get the talent in there, but develop them into one of the best groups in the entire country. So very, very excited to see what he can do. The coaching cycle was insane, as you can tell. That is only scraping the top of the iceberg, to be totally honest with you, because there were movements that I couldn't even get into because we only had so much time here. But at the end of the day, it was a crazy cycle. And just to give you an idea of where everyone is right now and who's going to be coaching your favorite teams at every position. So it'll be crazy. It'll be interesting to see how all of these guys land. Obviously, not all of them will work out, but I think there were a lot of really, really good hires made in some tough circumstances. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to have some spring overreactions for you from the Big Ten. Tons to pull away. I still have about 5 more teams here today that I want to break down for you. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.